You know, it's really rare that this happens these days because I feel like I've grown pretty familiar with the rigmarole of dealing with politics and political discussion and, white supremacy in this country. This headline actually made me do a double take. I'm not kidding. Like a real double take when I saw it. The NFL says it will halt the use of, quote, race norming, which assumed black players started out with lower cognitive functioning in a $1 billion settlement of brain injury claims. The practice had made it harder for black players to qualify. Okay, now this truly okay, wait, so we can look at the article. This truly sent me back, okay? This was wow, felt like I was reading something out of a yellow newspaper that I found in a local library. Listen to this, and most importantly, listen to when it was implemented. The NFL on Wednesday pledged it, blah, blah. The practice made it hard for black retirees to show a deficit and qualify for an award. The standards were created in the 1990s in hopes of offering more appropriate treatment to dementia patients, but critics faulted the way they were used to determine payouts in the NFL concussion case. So, for those of you who don't know what it means, basically what it's saying is so football is really, really bad for your health. People get injured in football all the time. Physical injuries, brain injuries too. Because you're getting knocked on the head all the time, Boxers suffer something similar. It's a very dangerous sport. So a lot of NFL players are like Twitter. It's like very harmful to your brain, like being on Twitter. And there are a lot of black people who play in the NFL. And what the NFL did was when determining the standards by which they would award payouts for people who have suffered brain damage, they assumed black people have a default lower level of cognitive functioning. Thereby, if a black person suffers a brain injury while on the job, because they were assumed to have already been mentally deficient, it's harder for them to get a claim, because I mean, obviously, like if you're injured on the job, you can get a claim for it. Then again, the 1990s. Anyway, it actually gets better. Okay, Wednesday's announcement comes after a pair of black players filed a civil rights lawsuit. Thank God. Over the practice, medical experts raised concerns, and a group of NFL families last month dropped 50,000 petitions at the federal courthouse in Philadelphia, where the lawsuit had been thrown out by the judge overseeing the settlement. Black players say NFL brain injury playoffs so bias. It says medical experts raised concerns. Are there citations for medical experts in here? We can take a look at that afterwards because the title doesn't refer to them. Anyway, senior U.S. District Judge Anita B. Brody didn't stammer at all there. Later took the unusual step of asking for a report on the issue. Black retirees hope it will include a breakdown of the nearly $800 million in payouts so far by race. They fear the data will never come to light. I don't know why it's unusual for a judge to ask for a report. My guess would be that it's unusual because this isn't a court case yet, or because we haven't reached that point. Sorry, not that it's not a court case. The lawsuit hasn't reached the point where the judge would typically be asking for information from the from any of the participants in the lawsuit. That would be my guess. Are there any lawyers in chat who know why it would be unusual for a judge to ask for a report at this stage in the legal process? Don't know if I could trust any answers I get from you guys anyway. Well, tangential. Words are cheap. Let's see what they do, said former Washington running back Ken Jenkins, whose wife Amy Lewis led the petition drive on behalf of NFL friends struggling with cognitive problems. Jenkins, an insurance executive, has so far been spared. Judges rarely ask for evidence. They usually leave it up to the parties. Okay, that makes sense. Usually it would be like the plaintiff would be like, here's a document, here's a file, here's a folder on this. For the judge to ask for it directly, I guess the judge might have an unusual interest in this. No, I don't know. Anyway, the replacement norms will be applied prospectively and retrospectively for those players who otherwise would have qualified for an award, but for the application of race-based norms. That's sick, okay? Because the NFL says that a panel of neuropsychologists formed recently to propose a new testing regime to the court, including 2 female and 3 black doctors. So what this says to me is that the NFL is suggesting that they retroactively pay out to all the people who have been harmed by their race-based standard before there's even a court ruling. And what that tells me is that they would lose in court. There's no other way around this, folks. If the NFL, like, if this starts to get legal attention and the NFL is like, okay, we'll form a new panel and everyone will get paid out and we'll pay out all the million, just don't sue us. Like, they know. They know. I would be very surprised if they could actually compile anywhere near enough medical evidence to justify a flat and codified racial bias, which assumes cognitive deficiency in black people to a court. That seems incredibly difficult to me. Anyway, um, I'm sorry for the pain this episode has caused black former players and their families. Well, anyway, the NFL noted that the norms were developed in medicine to stop bias in testing, not perpetuate it. Gigantic air quotes. And both Seeger and the league said the practice was never mandatory but left to the discretion of doctors taking part in the settlement program. However, the NFL appealed some claims filed by black players if their scores were not adjusted for race. Okay, so rating black people on a standard of lower mental cognition was never mandatory. You were never required to judge them by that standard. But, if you don't do that, we'll appeal the claims. So it's basically mandatory. Or at least in some instances. They definitely press for it. They have a bias towards as it turns out, they have a bias towards the standards that would allow them to pay out less money to black people. So, anyway, this goes on for a little bit. The reason why I think this is so interesting, well, actually, there are a couple reasons. First of all, this is insane. This is wild. I can't believe they had codified standards on this for decades, implemented in the 1990s, and this is the first substantive successful challenge we've really seen to it. That's unbelievable to me. Seriously, it really, really is. That's one. Second of all, I think it's actually a really strong indicator of the way that non-race-based incentives can lead to racism. Because one of the arguments that like liberals or capitalists or whatever will make is that, you can have a capitalist system without racism. It's possible to do capitalism without any racial bias in it. It's not inherently linked to one another. And I guess you can mind workshop an instance where that's true if you got rid of all colonialism and got rid of the many, many incentives that are brought about by having a racial underclass in a society that exploits wage labor. But in reality, which is where I live, this incentive was purely monetary. I would be willing to bet that the NFL, like, this wasn't the NFL, like, CEO and all their head managers getting together and saying, I hate black people. How do we screw them over? That's not what was happening here. They just wanted to save money on settlements. And racism ended up being a convenient metric, a vector by which they could get away with decisions that would save them money. But the racism, I sincerely doubt the racism was the point. They just happen to have a lot of black players, and they know that they can exploit people's biases when it comes to black people's intelligence to get away with giving them lower rates of settlements. But I sincerely doubt it was motivated by racism. Racism was just a convenient excuse. It's just the easiest way to arrive at a cost-saving measure. So that's one of the broader critiques, right? Even if you got rid of racism, like, overtly from a system, as long as there are potential monetary incentives to reinforce racial biases, those can stick around. And that's not going to take place in every industry, but man, the fact that this is still kicking in 2021, this NFL race norming system, it really makes you wonder how many other well-known, well-regarded institutions there are out there that are engaging in overt racism, just one layer beneath the surface. Like, if you just asked around at one of their offices, they would be like, oh, yeah, like, for sure. Probably quite a few of them. I mean, you remember that, the federal investigation into the Ferguson Police Department? Remember? After the initial Black Lives Matter? And they were like, the report was published, and they were like, yeah, this is racist on, like, every level. Like, basically every single individual component. of the Ferguson Police Department and the whole criminal justice system is just really, really, really racist. Like, wow, this is some incredibly straightforward stuff. One more federal investigations into more cities. Jeez, that'd be kind of fun, you know? Get L.A., get New York, all right? Hit them hard. Read the report here. Oh yeah, you guys should read the Ferguson Police Department report. It's listed on my ultimate facts research document or whatever. It's long, but man, and people were arguing over whether or not there was any real racism there back during the initial Black Lives Matter, like protests down there. They were like, these black people are complaining, but it's pretty obvious actually. Just turn over a couple rocks. You need to update your research doc. It's been so long since I've updated it. I definitely need to go back and do that. Yeah.